"Get the old man off the lane before he hurts himself or somebody's kid," Logan Sinclair said, not lowering his voice, not looking to see who might be holding the rifle in question. Nobody at Northcott Precision Range ever caught the moment Curtis Ledbetter signed the guest ledger that morning. A rank, a string of numbers, no name, folding the pen shut with 2 fingers before Marissa could ask why, and going on to the next thing as though the question had already been answered somewhere. It didn't need repeating. If you've ever watched somebody underestimate the quiet one in the room, you already know what's coming. The posted board at the gate did the boasting the range itself seemed too modern to bother with. 24 lanes, distances out to 1,000 yards, a $15 open day entry fee, and beneath it all, in Logan's own hand-picked font, a claim about the scoring system's precision down to 1/100th of an inch, verified, certified, patented. Against those clean, confident numbers stood an old man in a canvas coat, both hands closed loosely around a rifle stock that was not his, steadying it the way you'd steady a ladder for somebody you loved, while his granddaughter angled her phone for a photograph neither of them was in any hurry to take. The subordinate Logan had spoken to, a lanky range aide named Preston Renfro, looked from his director toward lane 6 and did not move right away. What he saw was a girl of 17 in a junior shooting jacket, laughing at something, and behind her, a stooped man with his coat buttoned wrong at the collar, wind moving the flags at a lazy diagonal that nobody in the crowd was tracking except, it seemed, him. There was nothing dangerous in it. There was nothing, on its face, worth the sentence Logan had just spent on it. "Sir," Preston started toward them anyway, because a director's word was a director's word. "I'm sorry, we're going to need the rifle back on the rack until—" "It's my granddad," Marissa said, phone still raised. "He's just holding it steady for the picture. He hasn't even chambered anything." Preston hesitated a half-step short of them, close enough now to see what the distance had hidden. The rifle held level without a tremor in it. The old man's stance set square to the wind rather than to the camera, his eyes on the flags 40 yards out and not on the lens at all. It was such a small, unremarkable competence that it took Preston a moment to understand he was looking at competence in the first place. Logan didn't come over. He didn't need to. He had a lane count to keep, a fee schedule to run, a scoring board mounted above the counter blinking its data in real time, precise to the number. And somewhere in all of that arithmetic, there was no room allotted for an old man in a coat gone soft at the seams, holding a 17-year-old's rifle like it was the most natural weight his hands had held in years. The coat was canvas, the color of a fence rail left through a decade of winters, and it hung on Curtis Ledbetter the way a tool hangs on a nail worn to fit it. He had buttoned it wrong at the top on purpose, one button off, so that the collar sat open on the side the wind was coming from, a habit older than the coat itself, from some year and some place nobody at Northcott would have guessed at. He did everything that morning in the same fixed order, unhurried past the point of unhurried, closer to ritual. First the flags, all 4 of them down the line, noted and weighed before he said a word to anyone. Then Marissa's sling, 2 fingers checking the tension at her shoulder before he so much as glanced at what the rifle itself was doing. Then, only then, the rifle. In his coat pocket, glimpsed once when he reached for the pen at the sign-in table, sat a small tin, corners worn pale from decades of a thumb finding the same edge. Inside it, though no one had seen this yet, lay a scatter of hand-filed brass inserts, each one ground to a private tolerance that no catalog sold and no machine at Northcott could reproduce. He did not open it in public. He rarely opened it at all anymore. Marissa's morning carried its own arithmetic, plainer than her grandfather's, but no less real to her. A qualifying score needed by the day's end to hold her spot on the state junior team, a coach watching from the observation deck with a clipboard of her own. 3 years of range mornings compressed into one card that either would or wouldn't get punched. She had asked Curtis to hold her rifle only so she'd have both hands free for the phone, a small vanity, a picture for her father who couldn't make the drive. She had not asked him, in 3 years of Saturdays together, exactly what he had done overseas. "Shot some," was what he'd told her once, the way another man might mention he used to fish. At the registration table, the guest ledger still lay open to that morning's page, his line sitting oddly among the others. Full names, addresses, membership numbers filled out by everyone before and after him. Where Curtis had written only a rank, long since surrendered on paper if not in the way he still carried it. and a string of digits that meant nothing to anyone glancing at the page. The girl working the table hadn't thought much of it. People forgot things on forms all the time. "You planning on shooting today, sir, or just visiting?" she'd asked him, friendly enough. "Visiting," he'd said, and signed the way he'd signed it. And that had been the whole conversation, except that he'd folded the pen closed afterward, as if it were the kind of question a man only answered once. Logan Sinclair had earned every ounce of the confidence he wore, and the junior class watching him that morning would have told you so without being asked. A boy named Sawyer Dilly had been stuck at the same wide, ragged group for 3 Saturdays running, his shots scattering across the target like buckshot no matter how hard he tried to still his own breathing. And it was Logan, working the boy through it lane by lane, who found the fix. He didn't touch the rifle. He read the wall-mounted digital board instead, the one he'd designed and installed himself, tracking Sawyer's shot dispersion in real time against a baseline curve only Logan fully understood, and from that curve he diagnosed a trigger pull flinch invisible to the naked eye. "Right there," Logan said, tapping the glass where a data point jumped half a degree off the rest. "You're anticipating the break. Board doesn't lie. Try again, and this time let it surprise you." Sawyer's next group came in tight, 5 rounds inside a circle the size of a coffee cup lid at 200 yards, and the boy's face did something between relief and disbelief, and the small crowd of parents on the observation deck actually applauded. It was a real fix, earned in real time, and it was the kind of teaching a man built a reputation on. Logan Sinclair, at 33, was a distinguished marksman by his own hand and a good coach besides, and nothing about what happened next required anyone to forget that. It was on the walk back down the line, riding that same current of certainty, that he came across lane 6 again, and this time he stopped. "That your rifle?" he asked Curtis, though his eyes were already on the receiver, on the sling, on the coat, cataloging. "Hers," Curtis said, nodding once toward Marissa. "And you're handling it because she asked me to hold it." Logan's mouth did something short of a smile. "We require current certification for anybody handling a firearm on this range outside the junior program roster. That's not me being difficult. That's liability. That's insurance. That's the sign you walked past at the gate." He held a hand out, not unkindly, the way you'd hold a hand out for car keys from somebody you suspected shouldn't be driving. "I'm going to need you to set it down, sir. On the bench, nice and slow." A few of the junior shooters had drifted close enough to watch, the way a crowd gathers around any small disagreement, sensing entertainment before they understand the stakes. One of them, a boy near the back, laughed under his breath at the sight of it. The coat, the stoop, the unhurried compliance as Curtis lowered the rifle onto the padded bench exactly as asked. No argument in his hands at all, no argument in his face either. "Grandpa didn't do anything," Marissa said, coloring red at the ears. "He was just holding it for a picture." "I understand," Logan said, in the tone of a man who understood a great many things and was patient about explaining them to people who didn't. "Rules aren't about intent. They're about liability the range carries whether anybody meant harm or not." He looked at Curtis with something almost like sympathy. "No offense meant, but I've got 24 lanes and 100 kids on this property today, and I can't have unverified hands-on rifles, however good the intentions." Curtis said nothing to that. He folded his own hands instead, one over the other, and looked at the flags. The junior shooters near the back laughed again, softer this time, more at the shape of the moment than at anything specific. An old man corrected in public, an old man taking it without a fuss, the kind of small social theater that plays the same in every schoolyard and every gun club in the country. Logan didn't laugh with them. He simply turned back toward the scoring board, already thinking of Sawyer Dilly's next group, already 3 problems ahead. The old man filed away as handled. The staff, dutiful, ran his name that afternoon against the range's certification roster anyway, because Logan liked things closed out properly. Preston Renfro typed Ledbetter into a database that cross-referenced every marksmanship certificate issued in the state for the last 20 years, and it returned nothing. No hits, no partial matches, no expired record even, which struck Preston as strange enough to mention. "System says he was never certified anywhere," Preston told Logan. "Not here," Not at any range that reports up to the state board. Doesn't surprise me, Logan said, not looking up from the board. Man's probably never fired anything heavier than a deer rifle off a truck hood in his life. Near lane 6, a junior shooter named Callie Fano, waiting her turn, nodded at the flags Curtis kept glancing toward and grinned at her teammate. He's still doing it the old way, she said, loud enough to be heard, reading the rag on a stick instead of the board. My grandpa does that too. Bless him. A ripple of laughter went down the line, gentle, the kind aimed at a habit rather than a person, though it landed on the person all the same. Curtis looked at the flag on post 3, then at the one on post 1, noted the half-second of lag between them, and spoke without turning around. Wind's building from the west, he said. Board won't show it for another 6-7 minutes. By the time it does, it'll already be gusting past what your sensor's rated for. He said it plainly, the way a man reports a fact he has no stake in being believed. Nobody argued with him, and nobody quite believed him either, and the range went on about its business, and it was in that lull, 7 minutes later, almost to the pace of his own prediction, that a car nobody had been watching for pulled into the gravel lot outside, and a man in a stiff new blazer that didn't fit the way a uniform once had stepped out of it, scanning the lanes like a man looking for something specific rather than something general. By the time Colonel Blake Overholt reached the gate, the wind at post 3 had shifted exactly as Curtis said it would, and the range's digital sensor, precise to its hundredth of an inch, was still reporting the old numbers. You want to prove something? Prove it on the line, Logan said finally, arms crossed, more amused now than annoyed, playing for the small crowd that had gathered the way a good coach plays for an audience he half suspects is worth performing for. 600 yards, no spotter, no board assist, nothing but what's in front of you. You call your hold, you break your shot, and if you put it anywhere on that steel, I will personally reinstate whatever certification you think you're owed. Fair? Fair, Curtis said, and that was the whole negotiation. He did not hurry to the bench. He checked the flag on post 1, then 3, then the farthest one out past 400 yards where the grass along the berm lay bent in a pattern only he seemed to be reading, and he watched the heat come up off the ground in a thin, wavering column that the naked eye could lose if it blinked at the wrong second. He checked Marissa's borrowed rifle's sling one more time out of habit before he ever touched the rifle he'd actually be firing, a loaner off the range's own rack, unfamiliar in his hands. Its bolt worked once, twice, to feel its particular resistance. He set himself prone without being told to. He breathed the way a man breathes who has done this 10,000 times and has stopped needing to think about the doing of it. The crowd had gone quiet in the specific way a crowd goes quiet when it senses, without yet understanding why, that it is watching something real. He did not ask for the wind call from anyone. He read the mirage boiling faint silver above the 200 mark, read the flags at 3 separate distances disagreeing with each other by small specific degrees, and out of that disagreement he built, in his head, a single number nobody else in the crowd could see. His finger found the trigger the way a hand finds a familiar doorknob in the dark. The shot broke clean, no flinch in it, no announcement. 600 yards downrange, the steel target rang, and on the scoring board mounted over Logan's counter, the number that should have followed. A distance, a deviation, a dead center confirmation never came. The screen sat blank where the shot should have registered, the rig cycling once, twice, and returning nothing at all, as if the shot itself, heard by every person on that line, had simply failed to happen in the one place built to prove that it had. The steel had rung. 40 witnesses had heard it, and the machine Logan Sinclair trusted more than his own eyes said nothing had occurred at all. For a long moment, nobody spoke, the disagreement between the ear and the screen too strange to resolve out loud, and Logan stood with his hand still raised from where he gestured toward the target, caught between the sound he'd heard and the number he hadn't gotten, and it was into that particular silence that Marissa said, quietly enough that only the people close by heard it. That was dead center. I saw it hit. Logan didn't answer her. He was already moving toward the console, keying through diagnostic screens with the fast, irritated motions of a man convinced the fault lay in wiring and not in judgment, and behind him, the crowd had begun to murmur in the low, unsettled register of people who had just watched something true happen and been told by a machine that it hadn't. He had not fired for score in 11 years. He fired that one for her, though nobody standing there yet understood that the shot had ever been about anything but proving a point. The dispute did not stay contained to one target for long. Because the scoring rig logged its results as a single running tally for the day's open session, its refusal to register Curtis's shot had frozen the entire board mid-cycle, and when it finally reset itself 20 minutes later, it came back with the last several entries scrambled, including Marissa's qualifying group, fired an hour earlier, now flagged in amber as unverified pending recalibration. "That's my score," Marissa said, reading it off the wall the same moment her coach did, and something in her voice cracked with an anger closer to fear than to temper. "I need that by 5 o'clock. That's my whole season." Logan, to his credit, didn't dismiss it. He pulled up the raw sensor log himself, scrolling through timestamps with a focus that had gone from irritated to something tighter, more brittle. "It's a calibration fault," he said, more to himself than to her. "Has to be. I'll get it sorted before anything's final. I promise you that." But his voice had lost the polish it carried an hour earlier, and Preston Renfro, watching from behind the counter, noticed it the way you notice weather changing before you feel the first drop. It was into that noise that Colonel Blake Overholt crossed the gravel lot at last, a folder under one arm, a look on his face of a man who had come to do a routine inspection and had already, from 30 yards out, sensed that the day was not going to stay routine. He was 61, built lean the way some men stay lean their whole lives out of habit rather than vanity. And he carried himself with the unhurried economy of someone who had once had to move quietly for a living. He stopped at the registration table on his way in, as protocol required, to sign his own name to the guest ledger, and it was there, glancing down the page to find a blank line, that his eyes caught on the entry 2 rows up. A rank he recognized on sight. A string of digits he had once memorized without meaning to. No name attached at all. He didn't say anything right away. He simply looked up, scanning the lanes, and found what he was looking for at lane 6. A stooped man in a canvas coat, hands folded, watching a scoring board argue with itself. "Whose report is due tomorrow?" Logan asked, still working the console, not yet having registered who'd walked in. "Mine," Overholt said, not moving from the table. "Junior program's state funding renewal. Board wants it filed by 9 tomorrow morning, complete, or it defaults to the vendor recommendation on file." He said the words evenly, but his gaze had not left lane 6. "I'd say you've got about 18 hours to explain to me why your scoring system just failed to record what 40 people watched happen with their own eyes." "It's a calibration issue," Logan said again, sharper now, defensive in the particular way of a man repeating himself to make it truer. "The rig's been solid for 6 years. I've got the certification on file. Whatever's wrong, it's mechanical, not—" He stopped short of finishing the sentence, because he wasn't sure anymore what he'd been about to deny. Logan went looking for the certification file himself that evening, alone in the equipment room after the crowd had thinned, less out of duty than out of the specific need of a man trying to prove to himself that his trust hadn't been misplaced. He found the folder easily enough, 6 years of maintenance logs, and near the bottom, the calibration certificate that anchored all of it. A signature, a date, a technician's printed name beneath it, that he read twice because the first time through, nothing about it looked wrong. The second time through, he noticed it. The name on the certificate did not match any technician the range had ever employed, not in 6 years of payroll records he pulled up out of simple, sinking curiosity, not in any invoice, any work order, any signed delivery slip for the parts that certificate claimed to have tested. He sat with that for longer than he wanted to admit. Then he traced the vendor code stamped in the corner of the form back to its source, the way you'd trace a return address, and found it led not to any independent inspector, but to a supply contract signed by Regional Director Colton Ovington, a man Logan had met twice at conferences and trusted the way you trust anyone above you whose name appears on enough paperwork. Ovington's company held the patent on the very scoring hardware Northcott used, and stood, Logan now understood with a slow, cold clarity, to profit considerably if the range's free junior program were folded and replaced by a paid certification course run on that same uncalibrated hardware. He was still sitting with the folder open when Colonel Overholt found him. "You trained under someone," Overholt said, not a question, settling into the chair across the table without being invited. The way you diagnosed that boy's flinch today, off the board, in real time. That's not something you learn from a manual. Somebody taught you to read data like that. Distinguished Marksman Program 12 years back, Logan said. Instructor's name was on my certificate. I never met the man who trained him. I did, Overholt said. 34 years ago, at a post you've never heard of, under a rank that man out on your bench hasn't spoken aloud since before you were born. He set his folder down, unopened. I can't file this report honestly tomorrow morning with a scoring system built on a fraud 6 years deep and no verified baseline behind it. The only baseline on this property tonight that's proven itself in front of witnesses is the one that man carries in his own 2 hands. You understand what I'm telling you. Logan looked at the folder, then out the window toward the darkened lanes, and said nothing for a long moment, which was its own kind of answer. They found Curtis on the bench outside lane 6 near dusk, Marissa beside him, the wind flags gone still now that the day's heat had drained out of the ground. Logan came alone at first, without the board, without the schedule, without anything in his hands at all, and stood a few feet off until Curtis looked up at him. I need to ask you something plainly, Logan said, and I need you to answer it plainly because I've got a report due by morning and a program riding on it. Curtis studied him a moment, the way he'd studied the flags all day, weighing something before he spoke. 6 years back, he said, somebody signed a name to a form that never touched your equipment. That's not a mechanical fault. That's a man protecting a contract, and your board's been reading his lie as gospel ever since. He said it without heat, the way a man reads a gauge. Your kid Sawyer's group today was true because you taught him true. The rig didn't teach him anything. It just told you what you already knew to look for. Difference matters. Whose name, Logan said, was on it? Colton Ovington's company, Curtis said. Whether his own hand signed it, I can't say. But it's his profit sitting behind it, and it's your program that pays for it if nobody says so out loud. Logan didn't argue the point, and didn't defend the folder he'd read twice already, understanding exactly what it meant. He went back inside that night and rebuilt the day's scoring protocol from the ground up, entering Curtis's unassisted 600-yard read as the range's new verified manual baseline, the one every future calibration would be checked against, and in the corrected file he typed a name into the record for the first time that day. Not a rank, not a string of digits, but Curtis Ledbetter, founding standard Northcott precision range, because a man who had watched his own machine lie to him for 6 years had decided, finally, to trust the older instrument instead. It was Marissa who found the tin's other secret later that evening when Curtis finally opened it in front of her to press a fresh insert into her own rifle's turret, replacing a windage dial worn thin from 3 seasons of her own shooting. The brass inside, filed to a tolerance no catalog sold, carried a mark on its underside she'd never had reason to look for, initials that weren't her grandfather's. GL, she read aloud. Grandpa, whose are these? Your grandmother's, Curtis said, turning the tin gently in his hand. Geneva shot competition long before I ever taught anyone else to. This dial was ground for her rifle, the one you've been shooting all season and never asked me where it came from. He said it plainly, the way he said everything, but something in the set of his shoulders eased as he said it. 11 years of a quiet he hadn't broken for anyone finally finding a reason to. 3 months later, the flags at Lane 6 moved in a light crosswind under a sky gone the pale gray of early spring, and Marissa Ledbetter settled prone at the bench with a rifle that was fully her own now, the brass insert her grandfather had ground years before fitted permanently into her scope's turret, worn smooth in a new place from her own thumb's habit of checking it before every shot. The junior program's funding had come through 6 weeks earlier, filed under a corrected record that named, at the top of its verified baseline, Curtis Ledbetter. Not a rank, not a string of digits, but the name itself, entered at last into a ledger that would outlast the man who'd once refused to write it. Logan Sinclair ran the board differently now, checking it against the flags before he checked it against the screen, a habit that cost him nothing and had saved, twice already, a junior shooter's honest score from a censor's cold mistake. Curtis sat on the bench a few feet back, hands folded one over the other, coat still buttoned wrong at the collar against a wind only he seemed to feel coming before it arrived. The tin rode empty in his coat pocket now, its last insert given away, its corners worn smooth from a lifetime of a thumb finding the same edge. and he did not reach for it anymore because there was nothing left inside it to reach for. Marissa's shot broke clean, and out on the steel, 600 yards off, it rang true. And this time, the board registered it without argument, the number climbing steady and correct across the screen while her grandfather watched from the bench, still, unhurried, exactly as he had always been. Some skills are never lost. They're just waiting for someone worth using them for.